I never imagined he'd choose her over me. The memory of our early days together still feels like a photograph I can almost touch. The way he smiled at me across the breakfast table. The gentle brush of his hand when we walked in the park. The late-night talks where the world felt small and safe just for us. I thought we were unshakable, that nothing could touch the fragile bubble of happiness we'd built. We laughed at the silliest things, planned vacations we never took, and whispered dreams of a family, of a home filled with warmth and love. Every glance, every touch felt like confirmation that I had everything I needed. But the first cracks were subtle, almost invisible if you weren't looking. A passing comment about my clothes, a shrug when I shared a worry, moments of distraction that didn't make sense at the time. My sister's visits began to feel like they were longer than necessary, her laughter a little too loud, the way she leaned into him slightly more than appropriate. I brushed it off at first, telling myself I was imagining things, that jealousy and paranoia can make shadows out of nothing. Still, little incidents began to pile up. He would roll his eyes at my concerns, dismiss them as overreactions. My sister's jokes, once harmless, started to sting, pointed and sharp in ways that I couldn't ignore. They weren't dramatic moments, not yet, but enough to plant doubt. The warm, comforting world I had known seemed suddenly colder, the edges of my marriage fraying. I tried to convince myself that love could weather small betrayals, that our bond was stronger than whispers and glances. I remember the day I first truly noticed it, the way he smiled at her, the attention in his eyes that used to belong only to me, a pang of something I couldn't name, a mixture of fear, suspicion, and sadness cut through my chest. That day, I realized that happiness is fragile, and trust is even more so. The seeds of doubt had taken root, and though I couldn't see the storm coming, I could feel the first drops of rain on my heart. That invisible line had shifted, and I was standing on the edge without even realizing it, unaware that my life, the life I thought was unbreakable, was about to be shattered. I never thought a single phone call could change everything. But that morning, it did. The moment I heard her voice on the other end, trembling and whispering, I knew something was wrong. He left, she stammered. With Sarah. My chest tightened as if someone had slammed a door inside me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. The words swirled around my head, impossible and surreal, like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. I stumbled toward the bedroom where his side of the closet lay. Everything still there, untouched. My hands shook as I rifled through shirts and shoes, the reality pressing down on me with every heartbeat. And then I saw it, a note, hastily scribbled, a cruel excuse, and my name only in absence. I can't do this anymore. I'm leaving, sorry. I dropped it as if it burned my fingers. The betrayal wasn't abstract anymore. It was written in ink, in absence, in silence. I called him over and over, my voice cracking. Why? I whispered, my voice barely audible. Why would you do this to me? The line rang, then went to voicemail. Each beep felt like another strike against my heart. I needed to see her, my sister, the one who had shared my childhood, my secrets, my laughter. I needed to understand how she could do this, how they both could. When I confronted her, she looked at me with an awkward, guilty smile, like she had rehearsed it, but still didn't know what to say. I didn't mean for it to happen this way, she said, voice trembling. I didn't know he felt like this. It happened. Her words were empty, meaningless, slicing deeper than I could have imagined. I shook my head, tears blurring my vision. You stole my life, I whispered. You stole everything I thought was mine. The humiliation followed me everywhere. Friends I had confided in, family I had trusted, they all seemed to know or notice. Conversation stopped when I walked in. Laughter faded, and eyes lingered on me in pity or judgment. I felt exposed, naked in my grief, as if the world had turned against me and I was left alone to pick up the pieces. Each breath was heavy, each heartbeat a reminder of how completely I had been discarded. I sat on the floor that night, clutching the note, staring at the empty space where he used to sleep. Rage, sorrow, disbelief, they collided inside me, leaving me raw and hollow. I realized in that moment that life as I knew it was gone, that my trust had been annihilated, and that the person I loved most had chosen her over me. The emotional wound was sharp, unrelenting, and as I cried into the darkness, I knew one thing. I could either crumble completely or find a way to rise from this devastation. The thought felt impossible then, but it was the first whisper of what would eventually become my revenge. I was broke. Flat out, nothing left in the bank broke. Every day felt like a battle to keep the lights on and the fridge stocked. Rent came due, and I counted coins on the kitchen table, wondering if I could scrape together enough for another week. Bills piled up like cruel reminders of my failure, each envelope a judgment I couldn't escape. Friends stopped inviting me out. Calls went unanswered. It wasn't just money. I felt invisible, abandoned, humiliated by the very people I had trusted most. I remembered all the sacrifices I'd made for my family. The overtime I worked so my sister could attend college, the nights I skipped meals so my parents could have what they wanted. I had poured myself into their happiness, never expecting gratitude, only love, but now even that had vanished. Flashbacks to birthdays I had celebrated alone, dinners I had cooked for empty chairs, and smiles I had forced onto my face haunted me. Even my own apartment felt small, cramped and suffocating, a physical echo of how trapped I was emotionally. Every corner reminded me of what I had lost. My marriage, my dignity, my sense of worth. I longed for the comfort of someone noticing, acknowledging, validating my struggles. But instead, there was silence. The world moved on without me, leaving me to grapple with despair alone. And yet, in the darkest moments, a tiny ember of defiance sparked. I began to imagine a life where this wouldn't be the end, not the final chapter. I thought about what it would feel like to rise above them, to show that my worth wasn't defined by betrayal or poverty. That thought, barely formed but persistent, was the first step toward reclaiming not just what I had lost, but what they could never take from me. The unfairness of it all stung sharply, but it also lit the path forward, teasing the audience with the promise that one day, karma would tip the scales in my favor. I remember the first morning I forced myself out of bed with a plan, no matter how small. I applied for every job I could find, from receptionist work to temp assignments, anything that would keep a roof over my head. Some days I was turned away, ignored or dismissed, but each rejection became fuel, a reminder that I couldn't afford to give up. At night, I scrolled through online courses, teaching myself skills I had never imagined learning. Accounting basics, digital marketing, even small business strategies. Every lesson, every certificate earned, felt like a tiny victory, proof that I wasn't entirely powerless. I started small side hustles, freelance writing, dog walking, odd jobs for neighbors. The money wasn't much, but it was mine, hard-earned and unshakable. I told myself over and over that one day these small steps would add up to something bigger, that this powerless, exhausted version of me wasn't permanent. I pictured the life I wanted, imagining freedom, stability, and dignity. The contrast between who I was now and who I could become kept me moving forward, even on the days when despair threatened to pull me under. Every setback became a lesson. Every moment of exhaustion reminded me that I was building stamina, patience, and resilience. My internal monologue was filled with quiet promises. You will rise. You will not be broken. They will see you one day, and they will regret underestimating you. With each step, however small, the ember of defiance grew stronger, flickering steadily into a flame that hinted at the woman I would one day become. Years passed, each one folding into the next, quiet but deliberate. I watched myself grow in ways no one had expected. Promotions came slowly, but they came, each title a small acknowledgement of the work I had poured into myself when no one else believed I could. I opened my first savings account in secret, watching it swell with the money I earned from late nights and weekends spent building something of my own. Every deposit was a whisper to myself. You are capable. You are rising. I started small business ventures on the side, testing ideas, learning from failures, and celebrating tiny wins. I remember telling myself late one night, exhausted after back-to-back projects, this is my life now, and no one can take it from me. There were moments of doubt, of course. The nights I wondered if I'd ever be free from the shadow of betrayal. But I also learned to sit with the discomfort, to let it sharpen rather than crush me. Occasionally, I ran into friends or colleagues from my past, those who had known me when I was struggling. Their surprise, their subtle respect, fueled my confidence. I learned to smile politely, while silently noting the contrast. The girl they once pitied was becoming a woman they could no longer ignore. Internal dialogue became a constant companion, reflecting on how far I had come, how my patience and perseverance were quietly shaping a future no one could touch. I was no longer powerless. I was careful, deliberate, and unshakably resilient, growing into someone who would one day command attention without needing to shout. It happened one evening at a mutual friend's gallery opening. I walked in, dressed modestly but confidently, ready to enjoy the evening. And there they were, my husband and sister, laughing together, champagne glasses in hand, the kind of careless joy that made my stomach twist. They hadn't changed, not really, still flaunting wealth and social ease, their smiles sharp and practiced. My chest tightened, anger and humiliation bubbling up like molten fire. I forced myself to breathe, to stay composed, even as memories of betrayal and abandonment surged with fresh intensity. I caught snippets of their conversation, their jokes laced with casual superiority. My sister leaned into him the way she had years ago, eyes sparkling with the same smug pride that once cut me deep. I felt the old wounds open, the ache of injustice raw and unrelenting. Every laugh they shared, every glance they threw my way, reminded me of how powerless I had once been. I considered confronting them then and there, letting the humiliation I'd endured spill into the open. But I stopped myself. I knew that acting impulsively would be satisfying for a moment, but it wouldn't serve the larger purpose I had been building for years. Instead, I let the scene etch itself into my memory, fueling a quiet determination. One day, the power dynamics would shift, and I would no longer be invisible. The tension between what was and what could be sharpened my resolve. I walked away, that night with clenched fists and a steady heart, silently promising that patience would pay. And when it did, it would be nothing short of devastating. I began to plan like someone assembling a clock, careful, precise, patient. Revenge, I decided, would not be a public spectacle born of rage. It would be a sequence of deliberate moves that used the law, market mechanisms, and the quiet power of facts. Emotions settled into strategy. Every memory of humiliation became data, dates, names, favors owed and forgotten, passing remarks I had overheard, and small inconsistencies that had accumulated over the years. I kept a single locked notebook and a private spreadsheet where I cataloged each detail, and I learned to trust the slow arithmetic of leverage. My first instrument was paperwork and the bureaucratic language most people ignore. While they flaunted appearances and bought the optics of success, I learned the contours of contracts, vesting schedules, and property records until the terminology felt familiar. I read mortgage papers, wills, and corporate filings, hunting for ambiguous clauses and outdated beneficiary lines. One late night, buried in a scanned trust document, I found a contingency that had never been properly executed after my parents' decline. It was the kind of technicality people dismiss as trivia, a missing signature, an unclear reverter clause, but it mattered. Once you see a crack in a legal document, you know where to press. At the same time, I strengthened my financial position in ways that were neither ostentatious nor fast. I formalized my side projects into a legitimate small business, opened accounts in my own name, and formed modest partnerships that served practical purposes. I invested quietly in small holdings related to industries where my sister and ex-husband had real interests. I learned the mechanics of fractional ownership, proxy votes, and how small percentages added together could translate into influence without headline-grabbing purchases. Over time, invisible to them, I became a stakeholder in networks that had once excluded me. Conversations turned into reconnaissance. I practiced neutral questions that sounded casual, but were designed to reveal useful information. How is the renovation going? Did you finally settle that dispute? People overshare when they feel secure, and I let them. I cultivated a network of discreet allies, paralegals, a retired accountant, a former colleague who now worked in municipal administration, people who understood that favors arranged quietly can alter outcomes publicly. They did not need to know the entire plan. They only needed to supply documents, notarize a signature, or quietly confirm a date. My moral compass walked beside me at every step. I told myself repeatedly that this was not about cruelty, but about correcting an unfair ledger and restoring dignity to a life that had been trampled. There were nights when doubt crept in, and I wondered if I had become someone who took pleasure in another's ruin. Those doubts mattered. They kept me honest. I reminded myself of eviction notices, of cold cupboards, and of the casual way my absence had been normalized. My aim was accountability, not humiliation for sport. Foreshadowing was woven into the design. I bought an unassuming watch at an estate sale with the intention of reintroducing it later into an auction circuit where provenance mattered. I orchestrated meetings that seemed incidental, but were calculated to seed doubt in their social set. A whispered question here about a transferred title. A carefully timed invoice there that showed an inconsistency. Each small action was a tile in a larger mosaic, assembled deliberately so that when the picture finally emerged, it would be undeniable. Through all of this, my thoughts remained remarkably steady. I did not want a petty, hollow victory. I wanted a decisive correction that matched the depth of the injustice I had endured, that required patience, restraint, and an appetite for detail. I learned to sleep with plans and wake with contingencies. I rehearsed how I would speak if anyone asked. Calm, precise, unwilling to be baited into melodrama. I watched, collected, proof, cultivated influence, and waited, knowing that when the moment arrived, the facts themselves would be the instrument of justice. Over time, I realized I couldn't do everything alone. I began quietly cultivating allies, mentors who had navigated the very systems I needed to master, partners who understood business strategy, and legal advisors who could see the gaps I had discovered in their careless papers. Each connection was deliberate, earned slowly, often in moments that seemed insignificant at the time. I remembered meeting Claire at a networking seminar years ago, listening politely while she shared stories of corporate battles she had fought alone. I followed up with small gestures, coffee, thoughtful questions, brief notes of appreciation, and gradually she began to trust me, offering insight I would later rely on heavily. Similarly, I partnered with a former colleague, someone who had always impressed me with both intelligence and integrity. I helped him with minor projects first, establishing a record of reliability before sharing larger ambitions. Each mentor, partner, and advisor was cultivated patiently, a reflection of the discipline I had built during years of struggle. None were naive. All understood the stakes and the subtle power of timing. I contrasted this patient, deliberate network with the reckless arrogance of my sister and ex-husband. They flaunted wealth, relied on deception, and counted on others' fear or vanity to maintain their facade. Their connections were fragile, built on flattery and shortcuts, while mine were rooted in earned respect and mutual understanding. I felt a quiet satisfaction watching them maneuver carelessly while I moved like a shadow, gathering the right people, the right knowledge, and the right leverage for the moment when the scales would finally tip in my favor. The first taste of victory was subtle, almost invisible to anyone outside my immediate circle, but it felt monumental to me. I had been carefully acquiring a small stake in the company my ex-husband had always flaunted as untouchable, the one he and my sister often boasted about at parties, laughing as if success came effortlessly. No one noticed when my name quietly appeared on internal filings. No one questioned the minor votes I was now entitled to, but I knew the power it represented. For the first time in 15 years, I held leverage over them, invisible but real. The moment came unexpectedly during a late-week board meeting. My ex-husband dismissed a routine proposal, thinking his influence was absolute, his smirk confident as he glanced toward my sister. I calmly cast a decisive vote against him, supported by other silent allies I had cultivated over the years. The room fell into a brief, stunned silence. He faltered mid-sentence, eyes narrowing as he realized a shift had occurred. One he hadn't anticipated, one that reminded him that he could no longer manipulate or control outcomes without consequence. Later that evening, I received a text from a mutual contact, subtly letting me know that the siblings had spent hours arguing privately, trying to understand how I had positioned myself. It was humbling for them and electrifying for me. I allowed myself a quiet smile, leaning back in my chair and imagining the contrast. The girl they had once dismissed, broke and desperate, now orchestrating change from behind the scenes. I felt a wave of vindication, a deep, satisfying relief. That night, alone in my apartment, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. Every small side job, every late-night study session, every calculated risk had led to this first undeniable taste of justice. It wasn't explosive or public. It was private, precise, and perfectly delivered. For the first time in years, I slept with a sense of power, a calm knowing that my patience and perseverance were beginning to pay off. The scales had shifted, and I felt for the first time that nothing could stop what I had carefully set in motion. The day of the event arrived, and I felt a calm unlike anything I had known in years. It wasn't the nervous flutter of someone seeking approval. It was the quiet confidence of someone who had done the work, earned every step, and now held the stage. The gala was packed with influential figures from industries my ex-husband and sister had always flaunted, a glittering assembly that reflected success I had once thought unreachable. I could see them entering the room, unaware of what was about to unfold, their laughter light and careless, just as it had been the night they humiliated me in private. I took the podium, holding a champagne flute, and waited until the chatter died down. Eyes turned to me, the woman they had always underestimated, the one they had dismissed as powerless and broken. I smiled politely, then began. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," I said, my voice steady. "Some of you may know the company I've recently acquired and the changes we've implemented. It's been a long journey, full of lessons, failures, and perseverance. And tonight, I'm proud to share that I now lead this organization as CEO." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, shock and admiration mixing in the air. From the corner of the room, I caught sight of them. My ex-husband's jaw had gone tight, his eyes widening in disbelief, while my sister's smile faltered, her posture stiffening as she realized this wasn't an accident or coincidence. I could hear whispered questions behind her. How did she? When did she? Every glance from the audience was a mirror of my triumph, the silent acknowledgement of justice finally realized. Later, during a Q&A session, someone asked about a recent high-profile acquisition. I glanced briefly at them, letting my gaze linger long enough to make the message unmistakable. "It's been a complex process," I said calmly, "and I'm grateful to the team for navigating challenges that some thought insurmountable. Timing, patience, and diligence matter, and results speak for themselves." I paused, letting my words sink in. They knew exactly what I was implying, and the flush of panic on their faces was almost delicious. By the end of the evening, whispers and congratulatory remarks circled me. Invitations were extended, opportunities arose, and my social presence shifted from invisible to central. Meanwhile, my ex-husband and sister were left to watch, their whispers of arrogance and entitlement dissolving into confusion and embarrassment. It wasn't vindictive cruelty. It was public accountability, a demonstration that success achieved with patience and integrity carries weight far beyond arrogance and deceit. Walking out of the hall that night, I felt a lightness I hadn't known in years, the humiliation I had endured, the silent suffering, the endless nights of effort. They had all led to this precise moment. Karma hadn't just spoken. It had arrived in gold and applause, in the undeniable proof that the girl they once dismissed had risen beyond their reach, reshaping the narrative entirely in her favor. After the gala, I returned to the quiet of my apartment, the city lights spilling across the floor like distant applause. I sat down, letting myself finally breathe, and for the first time in years, I felt the weight of every betrayal lift just slightly. It wasn't a triumph marked by humiliation or spectacle. It was the deep, abiding satisfaction of knowing I had done it on my own terms, without stooping to cruelty. My growth wasn't measured in the embarrassment of others, but in the strength, patience, and intelligence I had cultivated through years of struggle. I reflected on the girl I had once been, scared, broke, and utterly powerless, and marveled at the distance I had traveled. Each challenge, each setback had shaped me, forging resilience I didn't know I possessed. I remembered nights spent crying alone, wondering if life would ever deliver justice, and I felt gratitude for that pain, for it had pushed me to learn, to plan, to rise. My victories were now mine entirely, grounded in effort and foresight, and that made them sweeter than any fleeting act of revenge could ever be. There was closure in knowing that I no longer needed their approval or validation. I had achieved stability, recognition, and dignity, not by tearing anyone down, but by building myself up. The sense of empowerment was profound. I carried it in my posture, my thoughts, and the calm certainty that no one could ever take it away. For the first time in a long time, I smiled without reservation, feeling complete, whole, and proud. The wounds of the past still existed, but they no longer defined me. They had merely been the catalyst for a life I could finally claim as my own. I often sit by the window now, watching the city move beneath me, and I marvel at how far I've come. The woman staring back in the reflection isn't the same girl who once counted coins on a kitchen table, terrified of losing everything. She carries herself differently, steady, confident, unshakable. But the scars remain, faint reminders of betrayal, heartbreak, and the years spent fighting for a life that was stolen from her. Those scars don't diminish me. They define the depth of my resilience and the strength it took to rise. I've learned that patience is a quiet power, the slow accumulation of effort, the careful cultivation of skills and allies, the decision to act strategically rather than impulsively. These were the tools that transformed my despair into agency. I've discovered that self-worth cannot be granted by others. It must be earned, protected, and, when necessary, defended with unwavering determination. Betrayal may shatter trust, but it cannot destroy the core of someone who refuses to surrender to circumstance. Looking back, I understand now that every hardship was part of the path. The humiliation, the poverty, the sense of invisibility, they were the soil from which my strength grew. I can see it all clearly. The girl who cried alone, the woman who planned in silence, and the person I have become. I am independent, fulfilled, and aware that life is rarely fair, yet I hold the power to shape my own story. To anyone watching, the lesson is simple. Resilience, patience, and self-belief are stronger than any betrayal. Life may wound, but it also allows the chance for redemption, for vindication, and for growth beyond what you ever imagined. I've learned to honor my journey, embrace my scars, and step forward with dignity, knowing that my worth was never determined by those who sought to diminish me. And in that knowledge, I have everything I will ever need